Thanks. Thank you, Anastasia. And thanks for joining us today. Just to give a very kind of brief introduction, we on the Muskie team are very happy to be joined by Mary Mosope Adeyemi today, an author, a professional at Goldman Sachs, and so much more. But before introducing her, because I'd really like to hear directly from Mary, I'd like to give just a kind of brief summary of today's format. So we're going to have a fireside Q&A type of chat, so a little bit more informal. And we are using questions that were submitted by you, our alumni community. So we've received a lot of interesting questions, and we're very excited for the opportunity to get to learn a little bit more about Mary, her professional background, and how you took the career path you took, Mary. So with that, I'll just pass it off to you to introduce yourself.
Okay. No, thanks, Sam. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon from London, UK. Not quite 9 o'clock yet, but it's definitely getting towards the evening time. So wherever you're joining from, thank you for joining. I'm a big chat person. I like to do in-persons, but to the extent that we're all still on Zoom rooms, please feel free to let me know where you are joining from and maybe a little bit about what you do so I at least know who's in the room whilst I'm speaking. So as Sam kindly said, my name is Mary Adeyemi. I am an investment banker. I've been a banker for the last maybe going on 16 years now, I would say. I hope I don't look the fact that I've actually worked in banking for 16 years, but that's just one thing. I'm just a lot of different things. I think I'm one of those people who I would say I'm for sure extremely multifaceted. I believe that you can, once you get to know who you are fundamentally, you can operate in so many different spheres. So I've tended to do that in finance, but I've also been a passionate people developer pretty much most of my career. And so I run a very active, very thriving coaching practice, helping female early career professionals curate careers that are purposeful, profitable, and productive. And I do that through my company, Visibility. Many other side gigs, but we'll just leave that for now. I'm sure it will come up as we're having conversation. So thank you guys for having me again.
Thanks for joining us, Mary. And I think we can just jump right into things with our Q&A. So I've got some questions from our alumni community, and we've got about a half hour that we can spend with this before opening it to a more general Q&A for the audience here. So going back to the first management position you've ever had, Mary, what was the biggest learning curve for you?
So I was thinking about this. I probably became a functional manager, what we call a line manager, maybe about 10 years ago, I would say. But prior to that, I realized that I was already occupying management roles from a transactional perspective. So if for anyone who is in banking here, and I don't see the chat, so no one's talking to me and telling me what they do. So I have no idea who I'm talking to. So please do that so I at least have an idea of who's in the room. So within the banking space, you come in as like an analyst, senior analyst, associate. So they're sort of ranking. And every time you're like one removed from the title, you're almost expected to provide some type of management. And if we think about sort of, what is this thing called management, right? It's just effectively coordination and administration of activities towards a goal. And so for me as a senior analyst, I was making sure that the analysts on my team were able to get the model done, deal with the deal teams, make sure like the credit papers are done, all of that type of stuff. And so there was a layer of that. I think I was already occupying the function of a manager before I actually became what I think you're referring to as a people manager. And then I would say that I had to learn so many things. You're used to being, at the point when I became a manager, 2014, I think I'd already been working maybe 6 years or so, give or take 6 or 7 years. And so I had already been very used to being an individual contributor within an organization. I knew how to do my work and my work well. And I would do that and submit. And then suddenly the tables were a little bit flipped. And so I had to really learn how to shift that role from being not just an individual contributor, but also having a managerial role. So learning how to delegate tasks, learning how to let go of some of the work that I was doing in order to pick up new things. I had to learn how to guide and support other people. It was actually now part of my job, not just something I did in my spare time. It was now part of my functional role. I was a people manager. So that was definitely one big thing. I think also one of the things that I really struggled with was actually redefining relationships. So people are used to, especially your peers, they're used to operating with you at a certain level, and then now you're a manager, or people are reporting into you. The way you have to communicate with them differs. So in particular, where things are maybe more informal, now you actually have a formal responsibility to. So I had people in my team, I'll give you an example. I had people in my team at the time where they might have come to me in confidence about a specific matter. But now that I was actually on the management team, they had to be more careful about what they shared with me, because I had a fiduciary responsibility to report it. So the role of the manager really changed the dynamics of the relationships that I had. But of course, you're now also dealing with overseeing so many different people with different skills, making sure like everyone was motivated and moving towards the task, ultimately just made the work more dynamic, but also it was also more time consuming. So I had to really create time and space for management beyond the role that I was doing. And of course, I was responsible for goal setting. I was responsible for feedback sessions, which is also another thing, learning how to communicate impactfully and pass on feedback to people in a way that empowered them and didn't destroy them was also like a big thing. So effective communication was a big sort of learning curve as well. And then beyond that, it was just adaptability. And really, for me, learning to be a real leader. Like, you can be a leader without a managerial role. I believe like leadership is more of a mindset than a title. But I think there's an onus that really comes on you when you're in a managerial seat, in the sense that even if you're in an organization where you don't personally buy into what is happening, like the changes that are happening, you kind of need to figure out how to do what daddy says. Basically, you basically have to like figure out how to work within the boundary lines you're being provided, but still like communicate with people and help them understand it, address objections and all that type of stuff. And I'm Nigerian. I'm extremely point blank, period. So that was a very difficult thing for me, because it meant like I had to have my poker face on. And even if I wasn't particularly buying into things that were going on, I had to still help people get there. And figure out their own place within the organization. So yes, I think some of the few transition points that you would have as you pick up, managerial responsibilities, if you don't already have that. But I don't think like it ever stops. I think those are things that you have to keep on refining as you add more people into your team, as you even get more senior within your role. Definitely managing one person versus managing an entire department is a whole different thing. Or when you move from managing people to managing managers. So it's a whole different layer. And I think you have to keep on expanding on that skill set.
Definitely. There's a lot of helpful information in there, Mary. So we have a lot of people in our alumni community who are kind of fresh in the workforce, just starting in their career. And they're curious, what are some of the top mistakes that you see young professionals make on a new team or in their first years of their career?
Quite a few, but I'll give you three. And in fact, I wrote about the three in my book, Visible Strengths. I actually wrote about the three because I made all of the three and more. But I would, I posted something about this on Instagram, yes, like last week or earlier this week, I don't remember now, about the three top mistakes that professionals make, especially early career professionals making. I would say one, I'll put on the umbrella of self-awareness, is people don't really actually spend time getting to know who they are. And they just pick the first career that comes up, or they do what their friends are doing, or they do what their parents want them to do. That is a big error, because in the end, you have to be motivated to show up at work every single day, and doing something that somebody else wants you to do as opposed to what you want to do will definitely not be strong enough motivation for you every single day. So self-awareness, I think, was one of the big things. So what does that entail? Do you know your strengths? Do you know the things that you care about? Do you know the things that motivate or inspire you? You know, what is the vision of the future you are trying to create? Because that's really what you're going to be chasing every single day. Otherwise, you're just going to be running around in the dark if you don't align those things. And I think, you know, aligning your own, understanding your own strengths and cares and values and being able to align them to the work that you do or the organizations that you work with, I think is definitely one thing that I didn't do when I started my career until much later. And I think it's a big miss. If you can get it right, you will definitely immediately start feeling like you're living a more purposeful career right from the start. The other thing for me was around, so I'll put it under the bucket of value or contributing value within the organization. You know, I come from a line of civil servants, government workers, like my parents were government workers. And then here was I in like, you know, corporate America. So I didn't have the guidance on like what to do on day one. But I think, you know, as somebody who's also very task oriented, like I would just come into work and I'll do a bunch of things. And I didn't really know like whether I was doing the right stuff or how the stuff that I was doing was contributing to the bigger picture. I couldn't really connect the dots. And I think, you know, that's a big mistake that, you know, again, a lot of early career professionals will make, is not really understanding their role specifically and then how it contributes to the bigger picture. So as you're, you know, right from day one, there's a reason why you are hired. So if you're hired as junior talent, there's a reason, and not just you in particular. I mean, there's a gap that's like the organization was trying to fill by that role. You just happen to be the person that's sitting there. But being able to really understand, like, who are my stakeholders within the organization? What do they care about? What does good look like to them? And then how do the specific activities that I do every single day, how does that contribute to this sort of big strategy that, you know, we're all supposed to be collectively moving toward within the organization? So I found like I was always doing a bunch of things. I was always in busy land. I was never not busy, but I would get done with the day and I just wouldn't know what I did or why it mattered, you know. So I think definitely making sure you are contributing value by delivering relevant results was a big learning point for me, and definitely something you should try to pick up, you know, right from now. And the biggest one, and probably the one that was like my biggest issue for the longest time, was around this visibility problem. You know, we're taught, at least in my generation, we're taught to do the work. You know, be the hardest worker, put your head down, all of that stuff. That doesn't work in the organization, right? You can do work and do great work, but if people cannot associate you, if they can't identify you and then associate you with the work that you're doing and the value that you're creating, then you're actually just not going to be progressing as fast as you can be in the organization. So, you know, be intentional from day one about marketing your work, learning how to tell and share your own story, learning how to use that story to teach other people and carry people along. You know, I know visibility is always like the sort of the cringe word. Nobody likes to hear it. It makes you feel self-serving, arrogant, all of the bad words around it. But if you are actively creating value in an organization, it's not self-promotion. It's about value promotion, right? If you can focus on that and you know, redefine that in your mind, or shall we say reframe that, right? The whole goal why people do marketing, you know, Apple, every single day, people who have iPhones or whatever, like every single year in September, Apple does a whole spiel every single year. We all know who they are, but every single year they do not fail to say, hey, this is what we've been working on. And that kind of tells you just the importance of marketing. Like, it's about telling people, hey, this is the work that we've done. This is why you should care. And this is how we can help you. This is how we can help improve your life, right? So that's the point. So if you are doing good work and you are specifically, going back to my second point, if you are actively adding value and delivering relevant results, then people should know about it, right? Because it can be helpful for them. It can change their own lives. It can make their work easier. It can make their work better, right? So, and you know, if they don't know about it, it could be duplicating the efforts. So there's so many reasons why you should share your work. And so visibility is definitely one of the sort of the bigger problems. So yeah, 3 big problems: not self-awareness. I'll put that in the self-awareness bucket. The value problem, the visibility problem. Yeah.
Definitely, self-branding is such an important topic these days, and it kind of goes in hand with some of the other sessions we've had.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. So for our next question, some members of our alumni community come from cultures where being quiet or even being timid is the norm and is a positive thing. So how does one counter this thinking and learn to have more of a voice in their professional lives?
Yeah. I mean, I come from one of those cultures as well, to an extent. But I'm Nigerian. Africans are, yeah, there's a there's a censorship that kind of generally, maybe different now, but there's a censorship in particular. Being African, being a woman, I grew up in a school where people used to tell me women are to be seen and not heard. That was an active like belief system that I was told like for about 6 or 7 years of my life whilst in high school. So I do think that it's definitely something that's extremely sensitive. Sometimes the beliefs are so deeply rooted that it's a very difficult journey to change, but also it's not everyone is necessarily willing to change it, because I think sometimes these things are really deep into maybe religious beliefs, cultural beliefs. So there are lots of things like that. But if you are in the camp of folks who know that who actually want to use their voice more, but you just feel as though you cannot get over some of the things, that I can offer you some insights. If you are still in a spot where you fundamentally believe in some of the cultural and perhaps religious or social wiring that has happened, that's a more difficult conversation. So I have to be sensitive about talking about that, because I think those are more deeply rooted. So I really want to separate the conversation, because I definitely have to respect people's belief systems, and they are important to them and very close to them. But I would say that if it's just a question of, I wish I just had I would like to have more, more presence or more assertiveness, in my communication or in the work, then, these are some of the things that I would say, right? Like the question is very on point, in the sense, like, the first thing you always have to do is like understand like what the problem is. And it's been well defined here is, I want to do more. I want to speak more. I want to be more assertive. What can I do? So we know like that's sort of the missing link. Where is the problem coming from? Where did it start? Where did it come from? I wrote in my book about feeling that every time I was in a room with people who were more senior, like older than I was or more senior, I would actually freeze. I would actively freeze. I would have no words. And I'm not the quietest person on the block. I'm very introverted, but I'm definitely not the quietest person on the block. But I realized the pattern that whenever I got into like rooms with more senior people, I would just completely not be able to say a single word. And it took many years, but I eventually realized like that started happening because when I was growing up, the whole culture of respect within, how I was brought up. Whenever older people will come into the room, we will be asked to leave as kids. Or when my parents are talking, you are not supposed to talk back. And adults are always right. And, it kind of gives you with age comes wisdom. So here I was like having grown up with all of that. And then, now I'm like, I'm 20 something years old in a global organization, and my boss is like in his 50s, and I'm being asked to call him Fred. I grew up calling everybody auntie and uncle and deferring to them and not being able, so these are all big cultural things, and they show up at work. But once I was able to like pinpoint the fact that, hey, this is where this comes from, that awareness was like, a big thing in terms of unlocking sort of the next steps for me. So I think, once you understand it, where it's coming from, then it's now sort of time to like gather alternative evidence, I would say, or shall we say maybe dismantle the belief, right? What are the benefits of actually having a stronger voice, right? There's representation, you are there to represent your own views, but also the views of maybe perhaps people who look like you, have your own experiences. You are a representative on a table, right? So that's important and should definitely not be something to take lightly. You should also be thinking about, there's the whole point about leadership. You have skills, you have experiences, you want to bring that to the table. There's a reason why your voice is different. There's a reason why you're in a space. So it's important to be able to share like those views and not feel like you cannot do that. So I think just trying to sort of start dismantling some of those beliefs by almost just kind of focusing on the benefits of why it's important to use your voice. But the more important thing, really reflecting on like your strengths, right? What are the things that I know? What is the contribution I can add here? Why is my viewpoint, different and value add, right, in this conversation? How can I use my impact and how can I use my voice to impact and influence differently? And I think that's definitely for me, it's just knowing that there's actually an opportunity cost for me not using my voice. And so I have to just keep doing that. But the final piece of the puzzle is like, you actually just need to just keep on doing it. It's never going to feel better or different until it becomes a habit, right? Confidence is a muscle that comes because you're exercising it. It comes through taking action and being intentional about using it. So things like, learning to actively participate in conversations, even if it's just the one time you say something, just say it, right? And I'm sure there are many people in this room who think something, you're about to say it, but because you're like hesitating and you're thinking about it, somebody else says it, and then that person gets this applause, and then you're thinking, I was just thinking that, right? So let's not wait anymore, just, and even if you do say something that ends up not being the correct thing, you've opened yourself up to the opportunity to be corrected. Otherwise, you wouldn't know anyway. You wouldn't know whether it was right. You wouldn't know whether it was wrong. But actually, by saying it, it creates a feedback loop for you. So there are even more benefits to speaking up. So, opening yourself up to continuous learning. If communication in terms of like language or phrasing, or poise or structure is the key issue, and why you don't feel that you're fully equipped to use your voice, then train for that. Like go and like do work to build up your communication skills. For years, I did something like called Toastmasters, which is really about public speaking and being able to, create stories and, impact and influence using your voice, actually. So you can do that. You can build communication skills by just intentionally training yourself. I think some of the other things that I would suggest would be around networking and, leveraging mentors. So going into rooms and see how people talk, right? Where we are, as humans, we are very wired to mirroring. We've been mirroring all of our lives. When we were kids, we did what adults did. We saw that their two legs moved and we tried to do the same. That doesn't change. The psychology of mirroring doesn't go away, even as an adult. The more you watch people do something, the more you learn. You learn by watching. And it builds confidence. And sometimes even you can have, role models. When I share stories like what I just shared, I have a lot of people who connect with me just on that. And they feel as though, hey, if she can get over that, and now she's a public speaker and doing this all the time, then surely there's hope for me too, right? So there's a place also for mentors and role models that you'd feel have gone through the same thing, and just let them inspire and kind of empower you. But ultimately, you learn to use your voice by using your voice, is the short story of everything I just said. It's just, there's a benefit to doing it, both for you and the people that are around you in the sphere of influence that you're in, but you can only really build the muscle by just continuing to exercise it.
It's like the old adage, practice makes perfect. So Kanat in the chat actually posted that he's a fellow Toastmaster as well.
Hi.
So
yes.
we can move to our next question then. We're curious, who are some professionals that you look up to and why?
Oh gosh. I've worked with some really amazing people. Many of you would not know by name, but I would say like a couple of people just because of what they represented, but then I'll probably mention some other people who you might know. So I write in my book about one of my managers called Ade. He was the first Nigerian manager I'd ever had. He was the first Black manager I'd ever had in my career at the time. But he's a really good friend now, even though we haven't worked together for maybe the last 10 years. But I think what I enjoyed about him was the fact that he was very frank, very to the point, straightforward, gave very clear feedback, and was willing. He was really what I would call my first sponsor. I had had a lot of advisors in my career, but he was the first person to really say, hey, it wasn't just about giving me advice. It was about literally mentioning my names in rooms that I was not in, right? And really creating opportunity for me. And that really stood out to me. So I think he's definitely one. There was another lady I remember, Allison, and she was just such a beautiful, gentle, gorgeous soul. But what I liked about her, enjoyed about her a lot, was the fact that she was not shy to bring her faith to the workplace. And she was a Christian. I'm a Christian as well. But I think at the time, I always felt shy about faith in the workplace. And I just felt like maybe the workplace had no place for faith. But actually seeing her, like, not necessarily being overburdened, like with her faith, but just not being shy about it, talking about going to church, she would like, when she realized like I was also like Christian, she might ask me to like pray with her about something. And it never happened to me before. And I just found that it was just such an inspiring thing for me that she was like an MD, and she was more senior than I was, but just how you can really leverage faith. And she just exuded a lot of peace every single day. And that was just very attractive to me. And yeah, I think, so those two people really stand out to me, I think, about my career. And then one thing actually with Allison was that she was definitely someone who led by giving opportunities. She was one person that she would just leave me with stuff to do. And I'm like, I've never done this before. And she's like, you'll be fine. And I would literally just sink or swim, but she always trusted that I would swim. But I also knew that she was there to catch me if I didn't, but she definitely gave me a lot of opportunity right off the gate. And those were the things that I think really built character and capacity, in my time. But when I think about sort of the more frontline people, the more popular people, I think, people like Carla Harris, who's like, she's like vice chairman, I think, of wealth management, Morgan Stanley. She's been there for such a long time. I believe she might not have retired this year, stands out to me mainly because of how she weaves being a finance professional, but also being a people developer. I think I literally see myself in her, like almost as a picture. And she's written many books. I've only written one. I think she's on her fourth one. And I'm like, okay, we're going to be counting. Maybe I'll get to 4 at some point. But I think, just being able to see people have multifaceted careers without being apologetic about that, it's definitely very inspiring. And I think, there are just a bunch of other people, who stands out to me now. Indra Nohi, people might know her from my time at PepsiCo. Again, like, one of the foremost of the leaders of color, like on a global stage. But just her ability to, like, her fundamental understanding of who she is, it is just unmatched. Every time I listen to a podcast or a thing that she's on, she just knows who she is, and she knows that she can do the job. She's just extremely competent, and she's not shy about that. And it doesn't ever come across as arrogant or anything. It's just pure confidence that she is an operator and she can get things done. And I see the same in like Rosalind Brewer, who's the current CEO of Walgreens Boots Alliance. And I think she's one of 2, I think, Black women who are running a Fortune 500 company, I think, at the moment. And again, it's just this idea of, I can do the job and I can lead teams, and they lead with compassion and with empathy and very people first type of mindset. Anyway, I can go on and on here. There are lots of people. There are lots of people. I research them. I spend my spare time listening to them, like their videos, their podcasts, their stuff. I wrote about a few of them in my book, and exactly sort of, part of some of their stories that really stood out to me. But there are loads of different people.
I really like the way that you worded that as finding somebody who's not only a mentor, but a sponsor as well, somebody that can kind of put your name out there. And we've got some questions coming through in the chat. Thank you for that, Alina. Please, if you have any questions pop up, feel free to write them in the chat and we can get to them after after this fireside chat portion and once we start the Q&A. But please put those thoughts down. So for our next question, we're kind of curious, and you've touched on continuous learning and the importance of that for you. So what's your take on self-education and improvement? How do you personally keep up to date with some of the latest topics in your field?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I'm the daughter of a professor, right? So I've always lived in like bookland. In my spare time, I read Reader's Digest and The Economist was what I did as a child. Yeah, but also like a lot of novels and things like so. I think you have like the world is moving too fast for you to not be constantly learning. You have to like it would leave you. So I was reading an article the other day on Medium about just the rate of technological development that we're experiencing sort of in 2020 to 2022 is literally going to multiply like the development we've seen like in the last 10 years, like by 20 times. I mean, I know these are all like statistics, but what it's just saying is that we are now at a point because the future of work has changed so dramatically. And then you're seeing sort of, digital technologies coming in. It's moving at and it's computing, right? So it's moving at a pace that human thought and intellect could never have moved, right? And so all of the development that were human development of the last 10 years, multiply that by 20 because now you're using a machine to do it. And it's processing. We've seen over the last year, I mean, and those who have been watching the space for even longer, you've probably been in the AI land for probably maybe the last 5 to 6 years, but you can see how it has blown up in 2023, right? With ChatGPT coming up, like this is just how we're moving. So we can't afford to be redundant in our learning, right? At all, because otherwise there will be a machine who will end up doing your job. So you have to be able to set yourself apart and create your new, USP by continuing to learn how the technologies work and then how you can now sort of add that value on top and literally be the icing on top of the cake. So super, super important. I think it's just extremely critical in any profession, in any space, in business, in career, in life in general, to like literally be a lifelong learner. And whether that's formally, I mean, I've learned formally through courses, training programs, whether it's on personal development topics or fitness, getting a personal trainer, like, getting a food coach, I have a coach on most things in life, frankly, because that's just who I am. And so, you can do it formally. You can also do it informally through just masterminding with your friends, other lateral development stuff. I actually have an ethos that every single year I would do something, I would learn something different. For the last 5 years, I have done singing school. I have learned piano lessons. I've gone back to learn French in school as an adult, which is not easy. I have done Toastmasters, as I talked about. I have done a book writing class that I started as a joke and became an actual 300 and something page book. But that literally came on a whim because I was like, oh, what is the thing I'm going to do this year? Oh, I'm just going to go and write a book. I'm just going to do something. And I did it with Georgetown University in the USA, and it actually became a book and was published. Wild. It's still wild to me, but that was just on a whim. So you never know what you're going to come across. So yes, I think some of the ways that I actively learn, right? I learn through reading, whether it's books, magazines, articles, whatever it is. I learned through attending events. So in my industry, in particular in finance, you constantly have industry events, whatever is topical. So I'm always signed up for the market intelligence stuff. So I'm always signed up for The Economist, McKinsey and Co. People who they just send you emails on what's hot, what's trending. Is it green finance? Is it sustainable finance? Is it green bonds? Is it the whole sort of net zero conversation? Is it AI? Is it whatever? Like these people are bringing out sort of thematic issues, and you kind of know what's around the corner and how it might be impacting your industry. And so alongside the really helpful articles that they publish, that thought leaders put out, they tend to advertise a bunch of events in the industry. So I would, you can go for those, and I'm sure you would have those in your industry. Quite a lot of them. And so, you can do that. But I also engage a lot with I engage with activities in the area. You cannot really learn if you're not being present, and engaging sort of with activities. So if there are things around community development that you're interested in, go for the rally, stay safe, of course, but, go for the rallies, go for the protests, go for the whatever it is, actually be present and engage some of these things. You learn a lot. You can learn so much by just the person standing next to you, and sort of their own sort of thought process around things. So there's so many things that we see that are world issues, but we engage with them from afar, because we're okay, that's great. Net zero is great, but okay. But when you go to the recycling plant and when you see the real impacts of, these things on our world and how it's depreciating our world, I think you feel differently about it and maybe feel more engaged. I also learn a lot by listening, whether it's podcasts, watching TV, just listening to people talk. But I also learn a lot when I speak. It's interesting that when I'm preparing for talks like this, it's always a very immersive experience. It's interesting. People are oh, come and share your knowledge. And at the end, I feel I'm the one who has learned the most, right? Because I'm talking and I'm synthesizing my thoughts. But in doing that, I'm also refining what I think, and I'm learning a lot. And so through speaking, discourse, you can really pick a lot of things up. But yeah. There's so many ways, but I'm a vicious learner of so many things, and I'm interested in a bunch of things. So the same way with interest, I would read about. Actually, the other thing I did a few years ago was I went to fashion school, and I did a shoe design course, random, never used it to do anything, but I just literally did a shoe design course. And I have drawings of shoes. I'm just randomly curious about so many different things. And I think it serves me well, because at the dinner table, I can talk about a lot of stuff. And what seems to be the most random facts. I can actually tell you the different leathers and how they cut shoes and all that kind of really weird stuff. But it's good. It's good to kind of learn a lot. And there's so many ways you can do that.
Definitely. I think there's a lot of helpful tips in there. So I think we have time for one more question before we open it up to the audience Q&A. So I'm curious, how do you balance your personal life, being a woman, and also working for such a huge corporation?
The infamous question, balance. Well, two things. I think the fullness of, let me be careful with that statement. Anyway, I'll put it this way. There are a number of elements of my life that are not maybe overly complicated. I have other interests and other things that keep me busy. But as an example, I'm not a mother. I don't have a partner. And those are real things that can completely change how this answer might come out if somebody else was speaking. So I'm conscious about that. But I do have other things. I have other babies, shall I say, or other things that I take care of, or I'm concerned about, including family and parents and things. But I think sort of my big ethos in life is always everything can be important, but not everything is priority. And it cannot be priority at the same time. So, most people have probably heard the analogy of the glass balls. And, there's some things that are glass, there's some things that are plastic, and I think keeping that perspective is healthy. What are the most important things for me, right? So my glass balls, generally faith, family, and friends. So I would drop everything else for my faith, my family, my friends. Everything else comes secondary. And so that's my own sort of choice and my own perspective. And so what that means is that if I have to do something for my family, I will not let work get in the way. So I just have to prioritize that way and make those choices. And thankfully, I've worked for organizations that have been what's the word? They've been constructive around sort of topics like that, and they've really supported, more balance and more flexibility. I remember last year, you know, my health 2 years ago, actually, I had to have a major surgery, and it was my health was in question, and I really had to change how I worked completely. And yeah, so I was able to kind of do that and come out of that successfully, and then return to work and be more healthy and continue to deliver value there. But last year, my mom also had a really bad fall, and she was in hospital for about 8 months. And for probably about most of the time, I was in Nigeria, but was working for my firm from out of the country. Now, if they had probably said to me that I couldn't do that, I probably would easily just have resigned. Because again, for me, those were the glass balls priority. Being with my family in a time when they needed me was it's definitely something that's super important. So I think I say that because I think we all need non-negotiables, even in the discourse around balance and the discourse around integration. You still need to know what are your non-negotiables, right? But beyond that, I think everything else, you can have different seasons. You can have different seasons of, as I said, I run a very successful practice, but I work full time. And I work full time in banking. So that's like the extra layer of working full time, right? And so what does that mean? That might mean that, I'm getting paid to do something and I have an obligation to do it and do it well and show up every single day. But it does mean that during the weekends, I have to sacrifice sleep and, Netflix time so I can catch up. A lot of my client work is sort of over the weekend. And even if I have to do things during the week, they have to be short slots of an hour here and an hour there so I can kind of make it make sense. In many ways, I've had to really sacrifice. Even though my practice has grown a lot, I've still sacrificed its growth because I know that I am, economically employed somewhere else. And until the day when I'm not, then, there are certain things that I just can and cannot do. And that's the priority that, but, what's to say that in a few months, I wouldn't resign that job and just focus fully on my practice. That's a big possibility, actually. So it's all about prioritization and, just deciding, because I'm not doing this right now doesn't mean it's not important, but this other thing right now needs to get done. But also getting help. I know sometimes getting help feels like a swear word, but get help. I have a beautiful team that works in my practice that, help me out so well. I have an even more amazing team in my job that gets me together, that reminds me, you need to approve the deal, get on with it, so they tell me when I need to show up more, when I need to press in, when I do not. And I know I've been able to balance it a lot more because as I got more senior and as I have had teams to delegate to. When I was more junior, I had a more streamlined set of things. And that was a decision. I have less say on my time in this phase of my career. So I'm just going to focus on my career. And I think too many people are trying to do too many things in phases of their life that are still very, very new. And that's not wise, frankly speaking. I think there's a space where you have to build capacity and credibility in one thing. And then when you're able to almost do that on autopilot, then you can add something else, right? So there is a system and a way of prioritization and balance and, integrating, things into life. COVID, as terrible as the season was, obviously has definitely helped with just the flexible mindset approach, toward work. And so I regularly would work abroad these days, traveling in and out. So just came in from the US, going to Nigeria, in about 10 days. And so I'm always generally in and out, but I'm still able to catch up with my clients. Technology obviously helps. I have my phone, I have my internet, I'm constantly ready and on the go. And I'm definitely not one who shies away from using technology. I know there are people that are social media is killing the nation and, we're always on. It's good. I'd rather be always on because I have flexibility. So it's fine. If always on is the sacrifice for the flexibility that I need, then it's fine. And that's okay. So yeah, so I think it's just about what are your non-negotiables and you know what's the nature of the flexibility that you need, right? So that's how I would put it.
Yeah, so much of this work-life balance conversation comes down to personal boundaries and kind of establishing your own boundaries. So with that, I'd like to open the floor to audience questions. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask with your voice. You can raise your hand, or if you'd like, you can also type in the chat. And we already have a question. This question comes from Alina in the chat. So how do you develop a relationship with a mentor for them to become your sponsors too?
It's a good question. I think I would start by maybe thinking about who's the mentor versus who's the sponsor. And in maybe as in a quick format, how I would put it is a mentor is there for advice, right? They're not overly, they may not be overly invested. They're there to share experience, provide some guidance. It's pretty straightforward. A sponsor, on the other hand, actually puts in some kind of investment in you in an interesting way, in that they tend to put they stake their own reputation on your ability to perform. They go the extra mile, so not just the providing guidance, but actually opening the doors or giving you the access that you're looking for. So I think it's a next layer thing. And so in the way that I've described it, one thing that definitely stands out is that a sponsor needs to be someone who can observe your performance, because they are staking their own reputation on your ability to perform in whatever it is that they're recommending you on. And I think sometimes when we look to transition, when we're looking to transition mentors to sponsors, what you miss is the fact that you have to really think, is whoever my current mentor is, are they able to observe me in a performance role? If they're able to observe you in a performance role, then now the question is like, how do I place a demand on what they've seen, right? So that's probably the first thing. If I was going to answer the question, is if I want to transition my mentor to a sponsor, I need to make sure like they're able to see me in a performance capacity, not just as someone that they just provide advice to and stuff. They need to see me in a performance capacity. Also, the person needs to have the authority or the gravitas to actually sponsor me. So not everyone is even sitting in the seat where they can sponsor you, right? So also knowing like the person has to be someone who even has access to, you know, some of the places that you want to get to, or, you know, they have the key to the doors that you want open. So I think that's definitely one thing. And then also I talked in my book about sort of, you know, really fostering relationships. How do you turn connections, or maybe more, more uninvested relationships to probably things that are invested. And I gave sort of a boundary line around sort of, I gave a framework called SECURE. And I said, you know, you have to, if you're going to really build relationships that are mutually beneficial and just go from very uninvested relationships, maybe pure connections, you know, things that are a little bit friendly, but you want to transition that into relationships where people are, you know, really able to look out for you and be door openers, then, you know, use this framework. And I talked about number one, you need to serve that person. Again, I just mentioned about they need to see you in a performance capacity. And that's one way for them to see you, is to serve their own agenda. So a lot of people try to move mentors into sponsors by just asking them, but they're like, well, what is in it for me? Right? People don't make investments if there's nothing in it for them. So it's more of a strategic relationship. And so it's one that has to be handled with care. So you need to serve them and really support them with the things that matter to them. And that gives you the opportunity to show them how you perform and your own performance capacity. You need to actively sort of engage with them. So that's the E for the framework. You need to like find opportunities to talk to them regularly, whether it's regular meetings or working in certain groups alongside them. So again, there's regular contact. That regular contact is important. So a lot of mentors, sometimes, you know, you might meet your mentor once every 6 months. That's not sufficient for a sponsor. The sponsor needs to have regular contact with you, whether they might be your manager or your manager's manager or the head of a project team. They need to be someone who's having regular layers of engagement with you. Again, it's all about performance capacity and just being close. And then 3, you really need to care about them. I think too many people that, you build relationships for what you can get out of it, but people always tell, people know when you really care. And in return, they will care back, right? So you're talking about a sponsor is a relationship for the future, right? And so you're expecting this person to really care about your future, right? So, but do you care about theirs? So that's a kind of a big question. Also making sure like you keep that relationship, you understand the relationship, and you don't kind of make it messy. You maintain, respect and maybe even some type of distance, so it doesn't become overly familiar. Is one thing as well. So there's sort of a few things that you have to do, but I would say the big difference from that mentorship sponsorship relationship is their ability to see you in that capacity. They also being someone who can open the door for you, that you really want, and that you're somebody who is in close proximity to you, so that you're able to kind of manage that transition really well.
We have another question in the chat. This is from Kanat. So what are you looking for in investment projects? Kanat asks.
I might need more context. I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, Kanat, feel free to unmute yourself or...
Yeah. Hi, thank you for your response. And what I mean, I saw you investing in some projects, in startups. So I mean, like, what do you looking for that type of investment? What projects are you investing in? Like, what startups are you looking for? So you decide to invest in them. What is the reasoning behind that decision?
I'm going to keep this as generic as I can be, obviously just given the context. But I think, there are probably a number of things like you would look at. Invariably, if you're an investor, you want a return on your investment, right? That's the key thing. Investors are not giving free money. I want a return on my investment. And so I'm constantly looking at what is the idea, what is the problem that, what is the idea and what is the problem that thing is solving in a market. And is it a viable idea? Like, is it a real thing? How real is this business? That's a question that I would ask all the time. How real is, or is this a fluke? So is this selling hand sanitizers during COVID, or is this, something that would last the time, right? So there's that. Obviously, questions around that mean like, who else is doing it in the market, right? I want to know who your competitors are. Do you know who your competitors are? And, to what extent do you have access to a market where if there are already other people? Competition is one of the biggest killers of business. It's one of the biggest sort of sources of innovation. But if you already have competitors that have been in the space for such a long time, you have to really be a formidable force to be able to claim any kind of market share there. So I think that there's that. Then I guess also, like, as an investor, I want to know like how you currently funded, and who has skin in the game and who's going to stay. So if you have other investors that are in there, I want to know who they are. I want to know how much money they've put in. If it's just founders that have capital, I want to know how much money you guys have actually put in and how, willing or how motivated or demotivated are you to walk away from your business? Because that happens a lot all the time, right? And investors are just kind of left to fend for themselves. And even just speaking like personally on some of the things I've invested in on my account, I just had one business go into like liquidation. And it's an interesting conversation, right? I think there's that. Obviously, founders, especially in startups, are the 100% source of success for the business, right? It's all about founder credibility, their ability to operate, their ability to be strategic and have vision, their own sort of personal values in terms of how they spend money and how they steward the investment money that has been put, that has been given them. So I think just looking at history, but in the end, you kind of don't really know people. So it just sort of is what it is. There's a big part of that. That's just a faith journey that I will look at as well. But I think, yeah, those are some of the key things you might have heard about, like sort of the 5 C's of investing. And you talk about things like, character and collateral and capital and all the kind of stuff. So those are some of the things I would still look at. And then of course you look at cash. I want to know how quickly you can make money. How quickly can you make money? How quickly can you draw money out of the well, basically? And invariably from an investment perspective, when can I exit? When can I get my money back? So even if it's patient capital, is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? I want to know, like, what's the horizon for this potential investment? If it's equity, if it's debt, I want to know how quickly my debt is going to amortize, or there'll be a maturity date, right? So that's, a bit of a different kettle of fish, but hopefully that kind of gives you a sense. But I had to be kind of very careful how I answered that. I couldn't really give too many examples there.
Thanks so much for those examples that you were able to give, Mary. I understand why you can't give a detailed response on this. But that's all the time we have for today. So I wanted to thank you, Mary. I understand you're very busy, but thank you so much for the time and energy you've put into this, joining us today.
Of course, it was great. Thanks for having me. Feel free to find me on LinkedIn. I go by my name, so you can find me on LinkedIn. And on Instagram, I go by my company name, so Visibility, as well. If you are interested in picking up copies of Visible Strands, you can find it. You can find it on Amazon. It's on Amazon everywhere. So depending on the country that you're in, you can find it at your local Amazon, and it'll get delivered to you as well. So yeah. Oh, someone said she has one. Oh, thanks.
We have several fans of you. You were suggested by our alumni community. So.
Oh, wow. Hello. Thank you. I love seeing readers. Exciting.
We previously met in Next Generation Women Leaders. So
right. Okay. Amazing. Oh yeah. Very different forums. Part of my work with McKinsey. Excellent. Oh, good to see you here. Great. Yeah, so great to see readers. I like it. So definitely connect. If you have any other questions, feel free to hit me up, and I'll try and respond as quickly as I can.
Thanks so much, Mary. And I have 2 last little plugs for the alumni community. So we are doing another round of small grants starting. We'll start accepting applications from June 1st to July 31st for this new application period. We'll be selecting 5 projects for funding of up to $2,000. So assuming we receive enough relevant applications, we'd like to allocate 3 of these projects to be selected based on providing help to the Ukrainian community. So I would especially encourage you to reach out to any Ukrainian Muskie alumni or anybody who works with communities directly affected by the war, as we will prioritize that funding. And also, one last plug for our Muskie digital subscriptions. As Mary mentioned, continuous learning is so important to staying up to date with the latest professional news. So please, we are running this opportunity until June, but we have the opportunity to give you an annual subscription to any kind of US-based magazine or newspaper or some other platform, for example, LinkedIn Professional, for your use. Just reach out to me and we can organize it if it's some kind of a special arrangement as well. So thanks again, Mary. One last virtual round of applause. And thanks everybody for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
thank you.